All right, welcome out. We're going to be doing some critical thinking. This is probably some of the most important material you can study in your life. Proper thinking is essential in all areas of life, at home, in public, at work, wherever you may be, and in major decisions to mid-level to lower level decisions, shopping, buying a new house or car, or making political decisions or career decisions. And people generally, since I've been doing this, and this has kind of been a hobby of mine, a side thing of mine for some time. I worked in the computer programming field where you had to think pretty logically. And my father was a pretty logical thinker. He was a mechanical engineer. So understanding how to think logically is essential to anyone's life, anyone's career, anyone's situation. Right. So we're going to go through this book. I think there's like 16 chapters, and it's great. I love it. My students love it. Probably one of the best books I ever taught from. All right, there is tons of material in here. We do not have the time. I think if I spent 100 hours, we might cover this decently well, but I'm not going to do that. Maybe we'll do 10, 15 hours and kind of give you an overview of all this stuff, what's going on. And as you can see, I've got some of it marked out. And usually I tell my students if you use a highlighter, you're taking notes, annotation. Annotation should be you're looking for particular things and notating those things. You're looking for main points, maybe in the first paragraph, if that's what the main point of the uh, chapter or section is, right? And then after that, usually most of that text after is just developing with examples, illustrations, and so forth, right? But this is so densely packed with such great, detailed, specific, critical information, critical thinking, critical information, that I had a tough time. I used to say to my students, basically, don't have your page look like this, right? See, I basically highlighted two-thirds of the page. It looks like, right? So I tell my students not to do that, but I couldn't stop with this. There's just so much on here. That's good. So this is probably in my 25 years of teaching, probably one of the best textbooks I've ever taught from. All right. And it's critical thinking, but it's the only one I've seen, or the one I've seen that does more so and leaning towards the student than any other critical thinking book I've taught from or have used. It's really with the student in mind. So if you're a student, if you're just starting out, especially in the early years, freshman year, this is the ground up stuff, foundational, fundamental stuff that you need. It's great for your college career, as my students like to say, your time in college, your college courses, your degree. But even probably more important, or at least equally, if not more important, in your career and in your personal life and making political decisions, social decisions, economic decisions, and all major important decisions, right? So let's start with it. It is possible to learn to use one's skills of mind in a narrow, self-serving way, right? That's not that's not fair-minded, right? So we're starting at the beginning, is where we usually want to start. Many highly skilled thinkers do just that. Think of politicians, or don't think of politicians. I'm not a friend of politicians. For example, who manipulate people through smooth, fallacious is errors in logic, right? Talk. And I've, knowing this material, I've listened to even professors talk. And they talk in a very circumloquacious manner. And they really fill up the air with verbiage, a lot of words, and not enough specifics about the particular issue that they're talking about. I went to it was a 4-year university, it was a university, 4-year college. And I think it was mostly for architects out in Burbank, California. And there was a woman there at the beginning of each semester. You always go there with the other professors, and everybody does some cheerleading, yay, rah, rah for our program, our school, blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes our students, right? Students come last. It's always how's our college doing? How's our research going? Right? That kind of stuff. But anyway, she talked on. It was a science teacher, and she talked on, and she said this much was about that much. I mean, it was just, I was like, politicians do it too. I was blown away. Politicians love to do that, and I don't care which side you're on. And actually, the more uh, experience they have, and the longer they've been politicking, the better they are at throwing BS to the wind. And people, I don't know if they're listening or not. Maybe they're just partisan and uh, locked into the ideology of the time or whatever. They've been programmed and brainwashed or whatever. But I don't know what they're listening to. But if they really listen, and this is what you need to do, you really need to know, and that's what critical thinking is. You really need to know what is being said, right? What you're hearing, what you're reading, right? Anyways, fallacious talk who promise what they have no intention of delivering. There you go. And most politicians do that. They understand that in order to get in, they have to appeal to the public. But once they get in, the public kind of ignores who's in office. Believe me, I've seen it. I've seen maybe 8, 9, 10 different presidents say certain things and they go in, they never do it. And research has been done on this issue, and 90% of what politicians do once they get in office has little to do with the general voter. It's got to do with their election base. Their base is, what was the president? Bush said, my base. The people that have the money that get them into office, get them in, keep them there, and move them up. Anyways, who say whatever they need to say to maintain their position of power and prestige. In a sense, these people are skilled thinkers because their thinking enables them to get what they want. And they basically dupe people all the time. That's why I don't like politicians. I don't like politics. I don't like parties. I understand it's all essential. It's an essential element of a free society. So you've got to know what's going on, and you've got to be able to decipher and decode the garbage that's being thrown at you, right? From politicians, from media, from whatever source. And this is what critical thinking is for. But the best thinkers do not pursue selfish goals. They avoid manipulating others. And this is hard. This is very hard. The reason why people don't do this, and I've heard others being quoted about thinking. Thinking. One of the reasons why most people don't think is because it's very hard. It's too hard. I don't know if Henry Ford said that or Martin Luther King said that, or there have been very, very well-known individuals who've kind of spoken in that vein. They strive to be fair-minded even when it means they have to give something up to do so. They recognize that the mind is frequently not fair-minded but selfish. They recognize that to be consistently fair-minded, they also need to develop virtues, and this is the key. This is the key. And think about it right now, right off the bat. Can you be humble? Can you have integrity, right? Can you be courageous? Autonomous, meaning you're thinking independently, not based on what the group is telling you, or the media, advertisers, politicians, Hollywood, all these major, even maybe education. They all have a particular modus operandi or MO that they're operating under, and they want to do something, right? They want to push a particular agenda in order to maintain power, money, influence, or whatever. Those are usually the three big ones. Can you have empathy? Can you persevere, right? Can you have confidence in reason? Sorry. In this chapter, we introduce the concept of fair-mindedness. If you are able to develop as a fair-minded thinker, you will have to practice. And that's the key word, practice. This is not something that can be done in a day, a week, a month, a year, maybe 5 years. Maybe 5 years if you practiced it regularly, almost every day for 5 years. Then you'll begin to make inroads into being a good critical thinker. You'll have to catch yourself in the acts of selfishness, that's true, and begin to correct your behavior, right? You'll have to become committed to living a rational, compassionate, contributory life. Now, some people say they're compassionate, And some people say they care, but do they really? Right? That's another question. Do they really? Oftentimes, when they say I'm compassionate, I care, they're just pushing a particular agenda. And if you don't agree with their agenda, they could care less about you. Right? That's not good critical thinking. That's not that doesn't have any integrity, right? For example, when students are taught how to recognize mistakes and reasoning commonly called fallacies, just talk about that. Most students begin to readily see those mistakes in the reasoning of others, but not in their own reasoning. This goes on all the time, especially in the political realm. I've heard people of one particular side or party talk about the others, right? The other side, or the others who don't think like me. Those people are selfish, money minded, power hungers, whatever, right? And then that's exactly what the other side says about that side, right? So, where does the truth lie? Some may say somewhere in between, but not really. The truth is all over the place, right? And you got to be able to use critical thinking to pick it up. Where is the truth, right? Where's the truth coming from? Students develop some proficiency in making their opponent's thinking look bad, but sadly not to analyze and assess their own reading. So that's the thing. They're always going for these gotcha moments, right? You see it in social media, you see it in politics, you might see it in business and other areas of life. But it didn't used to be that way. And I was watching Kelsey Grammer. I don't know why. Is that his name? The guy who was on Kramer. Um, and he had a brother and father, and they all lived in an apartment in Seattle, right? And he said, things are getting out of control. We got to get back to human decency and kindness and compassion and manners, right? Now it's just attack, always angry and bitter and nasty. That's not good critical thinking, right? We call these thinkers weak sense critical thinkers. We call the thinking weak because though it works well for the thinker in some respects, it entirely. Now, when you're looking for words that really stand out and mean something, look for absolutes. Always, never, entirely, right? So if good thinkers, and this person is definitely the people that wrote this, put this together, are definitely good critical thinkers, good thinkers, good, rational, reasonable, solid, objective, humble, critical thinkers, right? If they say entirely, that means all, right? That's like 100%. Rarely, as a critical thinker, you usually don't go in that direction. You might say, like in a court of law, preponderance of evidence. What's that? 60, 70, 80% sure, right? And you're usually that. You're pretty sure 60%, maybe a little weak there, 70, 80. Now you're getting stronger in your convictions, right? But in most cases, it's difficult, if not impossible, to be absolutely true or accurate in saying all the time, never, always, right? Entirely. Anyways, it entirely misses certain important high level skills and values of critical thinking. Most significantly, it fails to consider in good faith viewpoints that contradict its own viewpoint. It lacks fair mindedness. Now, that's hard because sometimes, people are emotional. They love to join groups. Most people feel insecure about being out there by themselves. I want to say things or do things and become a target for one side or the other or both, maybe. So I'm just going to blend in with the crowd, right? And say whatever they say, right? Do whatever they do. It's difficult to be a true critical thinker, right? A solid, actual, to the core, through and through critical thinker. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of patience, a lot of sensitivity, a lot of work, right? But we need, if society was full of critical thinkers, I tell you, it would almost solve the majority of problems. I can tell you that much. Another traditional name for the weak sense thinker is sophist, like the sophists. I'll be okay. In Greek and Roman time. That was a whole group of philosophers back in the day. Sophistry is the ancient art, there it is, ancient, of winning arguments regardless of whether there are problems in the thinking being used, regardless of whether relevant viewpoints are being ignored. The object in sophistic thinking is to win, right? Period. That's it. So, and I've seen people in politics, even in academia and business and other areas of life, use that type of thinking. That's some sophistic thinking. Sounds like sophisticated, but it's sophistic, right? Not sophisticated. Well, it might be sophisticated lying, maybe that. Sophisticated manipulation, maybe. This form of thinking is evident in the arguments of unethical lawyers, prosecutors, politicians who are more concerned with winning. There you go, right? So with lawyers and prosecutors, even politicians, that's their main focus. It's, being honest and ethical and getting to the core truth of things is not high on their agenda. I gotta win. Gotta make money, get the vote, whatever, right? Sophistic thinkers succeed only if they do not come up against what we call strong sense critical thinking. That critical thinking, those people are not easily tricked by argumentation, right? By sophistry, intellectual trickery. The striking characteristic of strong sense critical thinkers is their consistent pursuit of the fair and just. Now, a lot of people speak to being fair and just and honest and true, especially in application of our laws. But are they really? A lot of times it's just talk. They want to sound good, so they may use those terms and talk like that. But in reality, their actions belie their words, right? Underneath those words, their actions show that that's not what they're doing. They're saying one thing, doing another, right? Anyways, the fair and just strive always to be ethical. To behave in ways that do not exploit or otherwise harm others, right? Here's a quote from William Graham Sumner, right? A century ago, depicted strong critical thinkers as what? He said they cannot be stampeded, are slow to believe. That's skeptical. If you are a skeptic, it doesn't necessarily mean that no matter what I hear, I don't believe it. No matter what I hear, I pause. It's more like it to see whether or not I believe it or not. I believe it, whether or not it's true, empirically true. You know what being empirical is? That's going for the facts. It doesn't matter what you think, what you feel, what you want to believe, right? Like scientists don't say, "Oh, I want to believe that gravity doesn't exist," right? They just do the research, the formulas that they put together, or maybe the samples of evidence that they take, the data that they put together. It tells them, right, what the facts are, not what to believe. Here, believe this. It's not about believing. These are the facts, and this is the way it is, right? Anyways, are slow to believe, can hold things as possible or probable in all degrees without certainty and without pain, can wait for evidence and weigh evidence, can resist appeals to their dearest prejudices. There you go. That one, boom, that's kind of it in a nutshell, right? Slow to believe, they can't be stampeded by the general population or the general consensus. Like in science, it doesn't matter if over 30,000 scientists agree. It doesn't matter. What does the research say? Forget the scientists and what they believe. What does the facts say? The empirical, got to touch it, taste it, feel it, see it, data, facts, right? I don't know. I'm not really sure whether or not this is believable. I'll have to do more thinking, more research, talk to more people, get more data, however you like that, right? So they can wait. They're patient. A real good critical thinker is patient. I've done that before. With certain issues, I've had to really take some time, days, weeks, months, years of listening, researching, asking questions, gathering data, and then finally coming into a decision, a decent decision, probably qualified decision Well, from my year and a half of study and observation and fact finding and listening to those in the know smarter than me, I have found with a preponderance of evidence, say 70, 80%, that what is being said here is true, or what is being said here is false, or what is being said here is we don't know. Right? That's kind of how it works, right? But people they're dying to be right. They're dying to have whatever it is that they believe backed up by what's being said or what's out there, right? So maybe 100 research efforts have gone forth, and there's been 100 times research has been done on a particular topic, right? And the data comes forth, and there's these 100 reports, and 90% of them disagree with what I believe, but I just take the 10% that agree with me and say, see, I'm right, right? That's what's done frequently. There's issues currently in the news where if you're of one side or the other, you just totally ignore all of the information, all of the facts, right? And just, select, okay, that one supports me and my ideology and my beliefs and what I want to believe and what I have to believe. This one I'll cherry pick, right? People do that all too frequently. Don't do that. We hope as well that you develop the intellectual courage, bingo, to argue publicly against what is unethical in human thinking. Boom. Now that's the thing, man. If you're courageous enough and go out in public and say, tell people, I'm sorry, the king has no clothes. He's not wearing any clothes. Remember that story? The little boy said, but the king is naked, right? The king allegedly, I guess he was walking around with no clothes on, and he just had his long cape and his crown. And he's telling everybody that, or people were told that he's wearing clothes. And they're all, you look wonderful, sir. Your attire is beautifully laid out, whatever, right? And finally, one kid goes, he's not wearing anything. He's naked, right? So that kid, uh, well, he's an innocent individual because he's young, so he probably didn't get put in the put in prison or in the hookah or was beheaded, right? But it's difficult, being a grown person and really telling the truth and opposing. Just think of how it used to be, right? When women were at a disadvantage um, as far as fairness in laws or the application of laws were concerned in the 1850, I think, of the suffragette movement, Seneca Falls, New York, really began to move forward with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, a couple of women who started to oppose the belief that only men have political rights, right? Only men can benefit. Only men can have well-paying jobs. Only men can go to college. Only men can own land or whatever, right? So if it wasn't for those two women who stood out like a sore thumb, I'm surprised that they weren't thrown in prison or worse, hung or something, because they were in opposition to almost everyone, even women. Women didn't want to say anything. Nobody wanted to come forward. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I'd love to have my equal rights, but I'm not going to prison. I'm not going to have them, do whatever it is that they would do, right? If I'm telling the truth. Um, you question your own purposes, evidence, conclusions, implications, and point of view with the same rigorous, hard, right? You question those of others. Bingo, that's the key point. Can you be as hard on yourself as you are on others? That is courageous. That is admirable, right? People talk a lot about heroes. That's very heroic, right? Kind of like what Martin Luther King did. He was a hero, wasn't he? Right, standing out against great odds, but he was amazing in his ability to move the movement forward and obtaining rights for not only blacks but all races, colors, creeds, sex, all sexes. So remainder chapter, we explore various intellectual virtues fair-minded thinking requires. Now, there's a lot of exercises in here that you may want to apply yourself to. I'm not going to go much longer because I just said I was going to give you like an introductory, and that's basically what we've already gone over. Now we're getting into the examples. So we know that the intro is over because the examples, excuse me, to develop the thesis or main point, which is what was expressed in the beginning of the chapter or beginning of an essay, is developed, explained in more detail through various angles via examples or data or expert testimonies or whatever, right? So now we're getting into the developmental section. So I've pretty much gone over the introductory material, the general background of what this chapter, fair-minded thinking, about. But I'll do a little bit more, then we'll move on. For example, some students use their intelligence and thinking skills to get high grades without taking seriously the subject they are studying. Happens all the time. They become masters, if you will, of beating the system. That occurs more 25 years of experience. That occurs probably 80-90% of the time with 80-90% of students, right? There's very few, I'd say 10-15%, and the data will back me up. About 10-15% of all students in higher education, I'm not going to talk about school, primary, secondary, especially secondary. Primary, just learning your shapes and colors and patterns, and in secondary, you're starting to get into reading, writing, arithmetic stuff, education in earnest, as we say. But at that age, you're just barely cutting your teeth on your independent thinking or rational thinking. Right? Not until college that you really begin to develop rational, independent thinking. But even there, most students are just miming or mimicking, whatever it is that they need to do in order to get the grades. And they'll study the material and purge what they've learned as soon as they can. There's very few students who really, and if you want to be a good student or really good in the workforce, be of the 10-15%. 10-15% do it. Not that more can't do it, but they don't. And they don't because they don't have to, right? The educational system is set up based more on grades than actually learning and developing a good critical thinking, independent critical thinking skills, right? Anyways, to develop test-taking and note-taking skills, they rely on short-term memory. There you go. That's exactly what I was talking about. They learn to appeal to the prejudices of their teachers. Bingo. They become academic sophists, skilled at getting by and getting what they want. Oh, yes. Oh, so true. So here's kind of a layout. You want to develop certain essential characteristics of mind. And we've already talked about this, right? Integrity, humility, justice, perseverance, fair-mindedness, confidence and reason, courage, empathy, maybe autonomy. Maybe what I'll do is I'll do a separate video of these elements, the virtues of strong sense, critical thinking. But for now, this video, I'm just going to traits of the undisciplined mind. So this is the underbelly. This is the stuff you don't want to do. You're a hypocrite. You're arrogant. You're unfair, lazy, distrust reason, cowardice, selfish, conform, right? Conformity, right? So I'm going to end it here. And I think the next thing I'll get into is kind of giving some detail on those elements back yonder here. What is there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them, right? So I'll get into those 9 elements in another video. That's it for now. Take care. Have a good day and enjoy life.